Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of All Things Policy. This is Swathi, and today I have with me Anisree, Research Associate with the Geoeconomics program, and we are going to discuss about a topic which is close to home, that's agriculture. And we're going to look at how probably a trade angle to this agriculture has been kind of missing in India, and how what could be the possible recommendations to it. And to talk about agriculture, it is one of the largest employer in India itself. Surely it has decreased post independence, but still around 40, more than 40% of the Indian population is dependent on it. The contribution to GVA, GDP has also decreased over time, but around 15% of the contribution still comes from the agriculture and its allied sectors. Of course, when you talk about agriculture itself in India, it's generally seen as a social issue or the domestic livelihood issue, but it is much more than that, and that's what we're going to talk about. Yes. So, Anishree, just give a brief introduction about why do we need to look at it from that trade angle?
Yes. First of all, super excited to be discussing this. Agriculture has always been a very politically sensitive topic in India, right? So I just wanted to highlight that first and foremost, that today's discussion is not about India's agricultural domestic policies. It's more about how India has been treating its agrarian trade when it comes to trade with the foreign countries, right? So, like you rightly mentioned, agriculture, although it might not be the most important sector in Indian economy, but it still remains one of the biggest sectors, right? 18 to 19% of the GDP is agriculture sector's contribution, and it provides livelihood to 42.3% of the Indian population. So that's a huge number. So that means despite the sector doesn't have that much of economic contribution, the surplus labor factor is really high. And I think that's where the trade as a goal is very important when it comes to agriculture as well. But if you look at India's trade policies since independence, we have predominantly prioritized to ensure food security and self-sufficiency as the goals of agriculture sector. And that means that consequently all the policies that we introduced have led subjected to various quantitative restrictions, import barriers, export bans, and you have higher tariffs and all those things when it comes to agricultural imports, right? And that means that most of the time India's agriculture exports are not doing really well when you look at we might be the largest producers of rice, milk and all these things, but when it comes to exports we do somewhat fall behind, or our farmers are not able to get the best benefits of the trade as well. So, but when you look at trade is usually it provides better export opportunities, better income, and better choices for consumers as well. But because of India's policies and certain kind of other things didn't work out well for us, which we will go in detail later. But that kind of weakened India's competitiveness, and the result was a paradox. Our consumers are not getting the best choices, and our farmers are not able to get better revenues from this system.
Right. I mean, as I think of it, India kind of is in the top 1 to top 5 positions in so many products, right? Rice, sugarcane, name whatever it is. But when it comes to the agricultural trade competitiveness, we are kind of not there on the list at all. And let's come to the most significant factor which has influenced the agriculture trade itself, and that will be the minimum support price and the minimum export prices which are there. Of course, everybody understands that this was a system that was brought in to ensure that the income of farmers are secured post the Green Revolution and all those things. But there has been a certain redundancy which leaked into the whole trade and economic sector itself. So could we just get into that?
So again, I'm not going to talk about the impact of minimum support prices on Indian economy in the sense that what it led to the groundwater depletion, all those things. So that's another conversation. I think we have done previous episodes on that. Readers can check that out. However, when you're looking at trade as a concept here, if you look at particularly since 1960s, that was a period that India was embarking a lot of policies on agriculture sector. And so we introduced all these minimum support prices and various price intervention policies during that period to support domestic production, right? So especially soon after India's independence, there were some reports that Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru back then said that everything else can cater but agriculture.
Yeah.
So that was a priority that was set for agriculture back then. So immediately, one of the first policies that we introduced in the sector was also this kind of policy intervention in terms of minimum support prices. So you have institutionalization of various price commissions to recommend minimum support prices and everything. And entire goal was reduce the dependency on the imported food grains during that period. So I think pretty much I'm not going to give much about what MSP is. It basically like a kind of a floor price. So the APC or the price commission kind of recommends okay, this is the price we should give as a floor price for these kind of products. So right now I think we have it for 22 products and so. But what happened is initially it was introduced as a insurance price, right? In the sense this is a floor price, so the market can go beyond that.
Yeah.
But right now what happened is it's the dream price. It's the most remunerative price that a farmers can get.
Yeah.
So the problem with that is that eventually the farmers continue depending on MSP, not much on the market, and the demand supply equation is not working out anymore. You have diversified agricultural production because of the fact that only these products you get MSP. So this is a secured price. Let's not risk it anymore.
And I'm sure within that the rice gets a higher.
Yes, so rice, wheat, that gets the highest, and I think sugar cane also.
Yeah.
So rice, wheat probably because there is a procurement also. So that means this is an assured price.
Yeah.
So let's not risk it. Let's not invest anywhere else, but in this. So that means you have undiversified agricultural production. Second, you might not be able to export because this is a MSP price and sometimes the global prices goes up and down, right? So most of the time our prices are too high domestically. It might not work well. You might not be that competent in the export markets. So those all problems comes with the MSP, right? So that means and I want to highlight that 22% of India's agricultural output comes from these products like rice, wheat and everything. So because we are all concentrated on it. But if you actually look at the consumption pattern of people, it's not we are moving away from staple food like rice, wheat and all these days. So there is definite mismatch of demand and supply when it comes to these products.
I remember when we study about the Green Revolution and post that, if you look at states like West Bengal and all that, because there was so much of these support systems which came into places, almost all 3 seasons are just rice. And even after our, the health conscious society as it's coming up, there's shift towards millet and everything, but somehow their MSPs never matched up to the other products.
So that's the problem, the demand, the market functions based on demand and supply, right? So when here you're not looking at the demand at all. The demand is purely coming from the government procurement and the MSP. So that's where the mismatch happens. And that means you're only looking at the MSP. You're not looking at the export opportunities that you might get if you be competent or look at other products that might be much more environmentally friendly for India as well as might be giving much more the returns in terms of And then I think another policy is lot of export bans, in the sense India has a lot of instances of we import export bans on rice, non-basmati rice and everything, and we also have this minimum export prices for products like onions and everything, so that we say that this is a minimum price, export price that you should have if you want to export to other countries. So this is also very complicated mechanism, right? It definitely disincentivizes the farmers from exporting or producing more and all those things. And most of the time what happens is this MEP, the minimum export prices, are always higher than the prevailing prices in the global market. So definitely you are making your own farmers competitiveness in the it's making all those things. So that totally disincentivizes that export market opportunities and everything. So I think minimum export policy definitely is a redundant policy in that sense. It has a lot of unintended consequence. One, it costs the producers as they're losing the opportunity to get much more remunerative prices in the global market. and it definitely disproportionately impacts the smaller farmers, because larger farmers can actually, like, they caught this buying houses and all those things, so they can actually price a larger cot and get away from this minimum export prices restrictions and everything. And I think thirdly, like, it generally disincentivizes all the producers to produce less. So that's
It is a
that's
paradox,
a yeah.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
a major problem with this kind of policy.
And now coming to the barriers, right? Of course, there are tariff-based things, and there are also a lot of non-tariff barriers that India gets
Yes.
into the system. And this is not just like a direct policy. This keeps changing with respect to rules, and then of course any other nation's tariff changes also impacts these things, and of course the relations kind of come into play. So what are these non-tariff barriers specifically, if you could tell it out, and how does this actually incentivizes the whole sector itself, when it comes to the development and all that. Even things like when we talk about these MSP, MEP, you did mention the large farmer, small farmer issue, right? There is so much of unawareness which comes to that. They don't even really get whatever these subsidies are. There's a very few, portion of farmers who really get it, which means it's already driving away the, innovation or development in this sector.
See, that's the thing, no? Like we started the conversation with, like, the 42% of India's population is still dependent on the agriculture or allied sectors. So that means, like, there's a definite surplus of labor. How do you move that surplus labor from agriculture to much more productive sectors, which is the end goal, right? Like, you need the economic growth to happen to all these people. So that means you need innovation, you need more revenue coming to the farmers, so that eventually the future generations may be able to move away from those sectors if that's necessary. And you, like, see, the food self-sufficiency was our goal back in 1940s and 50s. I don't think that should be remain now in a much more globalized, much more, like, the trade could happen, the economic growth could happen. Otherwise, that doesn't stand. And coming back to the point of, like, tariffs and non-tariff, India is one of the highest tariff structures we have among all the G20 countries, if you're looking at, especially for agriculture. So our most favored nation rate would be like around 37%. And for example, rice, which we are highly competent, we export, we are the largest producers of rice, and we export a lot of rice as well. The import, the tariff rate is like 70%. So I feel like when you're really competent, do we need that much of tariff structure? You should be, like, allow the innovation to happen, right? And much more, that means, like, you might get lower priced rice available as well in the market. That means, like, food security might be addressed with that trade itself. So, and if you look at within the agriculture, alcohols and wines, they are the highest tariff structure within agriculture. So you have around like 122%, and even edible oil, which we import a lot, is like again like 35 to 40% for the refined oil, refined edible oil. So this is like, we have the like most more complicated tariff structures than any other country when it compared to our peers. And so what happens when you have a higher tariff structure is that it makes the agricultural imports very expensive. So, but we are continuously dependent on imports like edible oil mainly. That's our like, I think almost 60% or above 50% of our edible oil needs we are importing.
Correct. So palm oil ones,
palm oil, and all this, like even soy oil or some of these oils we keep importing, which is like has these higher tariffs that makes it makes it very expensive for the consumers, right? And it limits the consumer's choice as well. Like how much an average Indian can buy these prices? That's a huge question. So if the food security was one of our goals, why are we keeping the import tariffs high? Right.
And food security shouldn't be just having the food; it should be also purchasing the food, right?
You should be able to afford these. Right. Like and edible oil actually plays a very important role in our culinary preferences as well. So it's like it's not something that Indians can ignore. So then coming back to the non-tariff barriers, which is an extensive list. I don't think like we need another episode for that. But like, outrightly to speak, like we have bans on certain animal fats and oils. So it's one kind of export barriers. So some involve licensing requirement for specifically for livestock related. So all the dairy products or like any livestock products that we are importing that need certain kind of licensing from government controlled institutions. And then we also have tariff-free quotas, which is interesting because like, we signed a lot of like free trade agreements, right? So all this, like, even though we try to protect agriculture as much as we can, there are certain sectors we say like, okay, we'll open this up, but there's a tariff-free quota. Like up to this small quantity of imports that's coming from other countries, we say that, okay, tariff rate is nil, otherwise it has to like go up. But it's very minimal that it hardly makes a dent in the domestic economy, right?
Okay.
Yeah. And okay, I think some interesting restrictions are rooted in religious and cultural preferences. For example, like India prohibits dairy imports from animals fed with organ or blood meal. Like basically the feed should be vegetarian and if you look at, that's also one of the reasons why our livestock is not as productive as when it compared to European or US livestock. For the matter that, like, in these meal, they include certain protein elements, which is really good for the livestock apparently. And we kind of deny that kind of imports that makes our feed for livestock expensive. And that's why our livestock is like not that.
That's very interesting. I think that also leaps into why the protein powders available is so expensive because most of them mention that this is imported from Ireland and all that, and it's just
so
getting
that's
so
why
costly.
the whey protein from US is like banned in India because like it's it has
Input
it,
materials are not
so the protein that's made from these dairy products are like these livestock are fed by these protein meals, so that's why we're not allowing these.
Very interesting.
Yeah, but then I think these kind of things, like I know, like if the cultural or religious sentiments has to be respected, then the labeling can solve a lot of these problems. Right? Instead of outrightly banning it, we can like have like, okay, this is like, you can have a proper labeling for these things, mentioning that, okay, this is a livestock fed by these kind of meat. Hence, if you don't prefer to like, the choice should be up to consumers at the end of the day.
Even the free market principle itself is applied there.
So, now coming to the sanitary and phytosanitary restrictions. So we again have a lot of technical barriers to trade. So that means like you need health certificate for the livestock to if you want to import dairy products to India, and again, which definitely makes it very costly and expensive to comply with these kind of regulations, and hence a lot of people say like, okay, we want to stay. If you look at it, the dairy products are cheap in India, but the products that are coming from other countries are much more cheaper. So that's why like we try to protect our market from all this like this thing. Yeah, and another important aspect is like GM, genetically modified crops in India. So we have allowed cotton in 2002, but since then we have not cleared any like genetically modified varieties, cotton varieties or any other food or feed crops into India. So another interesting aspect is like all the genetically modified products. So except cotton, we haven't allowed any like any crops of genetically modified to be availed in in Indian markets. But then if I say that like there are actually available, but in the sense like we say that if it's refined, for example soy, GM soy, and they make soy oil from these GM based soy crops. But then they say once it's refined, they believe that the GM, the impact of GM might not be visible.
So then the oil is allowed.
Yeah. So it's already there in the market, and like it scientifically, if you look at it, that doesn't have any kind of scientific validation or justification to this kind of thing. But that's how our policies has been. And the problem with this kind of policy is that, like, for example, if you look at US or Brazil, they are the largest exporters of genetically modified soy and maize, which are used for animal feed.
Right.
Again, since India is very reluctant to import these products, that's keeping the domestic feed for our livestock very high. So the productivity goes down, the same argument that I was mentioning, the same issues with these kind of products. So because of all these reasons, India's productivity gap with global competitors is stubbornly wide. That's a major issues with all these kind of the unintended consequences of these kind of policies.
And there is still so much of the subsistence, rain-fed farming, small land size,
Yeah,
everything
so
which is
all these problems already exist.
Yeah,
And
this is just building up onto it. And coming to how the international community is trying to deal with it, or the international, the governments, and we have to talk about the WTO, of course. And one of the historic meetings or everything that came up was the agreement on agriculture, which came up, and then of course which led to a lot of disputes between multiple countries with respect to how do they define their subsidies, how do they bring this MSP valid into the system. And then of course WTO had to create categories within this to allow this, because again agriculture was seen as the social problem, right? The food security was the critical point. So how has India's policies impacted its geopolitical presence when it comes to these WTO, and how has the AOA or the agreement on agriculture impacted India itself?
So I'll try to focus on India's general attempt at liberalization of agriculture sector first, and then we'll come to this point. So if you look at it, in 1991 onwards, we had a lot of liberalization movements happening in all the other sectors of Indian economy except agriculture. Agriculture back then was also highly protected, and we stayed away from any kind of reforms in the agriculture sector. That's why self-sufficiency and food security remains as the goals of the agriculture sector even now. But we signed the WTO agreement on agriculture, which is the AOA, in 1994. Since then, we're okay, since we signed this, we'll try to see how we can incorporate certain kind of liberalization. But TLDR, that didn't have much impact on in agriculture. So basically, if you want to talk about the agreement on agriculture, that basically what is the one key element was tariffication of all non-tariff barriers, which means that whatever non-tariff barriers we have, like quantitative restrictions and everything, we removed all them, and instead we said that we'll set a ceiling rate for all the tariffs, for all the products. So basically, for example, India said that we will bound our tariffs, agricultural tariffs at 81%. So anything, any products in the agriculture sector, we can fix a tariff up to 80. So for that, same way, for certain commodities, we said 100%, and for the processed product, we said up to 150%. So that means it gave certain kind of flexibility to Indian policy makers to change the tariff rates whenever they feel it's needed. So the problem with that is you have too much flexibility with the tariff rate, you kind of come out as an unreliable partner. For the matter that you keep changing tariff policy, or the supply chains, the trade happens when you have a trust, when you have someone as reliable as a partner, right? So this affects that aspect. Now, if you want to look at all the free trade agreements, in terms of our relations with a lot of countries, we sign a lot of free trade. We have a couple of a dozen of free trade agreement. But if you look at the consistent pattern in all these free trade agreement is that when it comes to agriculture, when it comes to dairy products, we make very narrow commitments. So we try to stay away from agriculture and dairy sector. We say that it's a politically sensitive area for India. In somewhat it is, in India, in Indian economy, onion products can actually, the price of an onion can dictate how our election results would be, right? So that it's a very politically sensitive topic. But the problem is we also have to see that how we can enhance the economy and the growth of the economy and all those things. So basically in all the free trade agreements, we excluded dairy products, and we maintained something called special safeguard measures, and in quota tariffs, up to this quota, we will allow nil tariff rate, but then you have to pay higher tariff rate, but which is very minimal. So that doesn't have much impact on the trade or anything. And so also in most of the FTAs, we have something called an exclusion list, which basically all the agricultural products is just saying that these are the areas we're not going to touch, you have to pay the tariffs. So the problem is this creates a lot of conditions. So if you look at our negotiations with the US or EU even now, the one critical area that we often take a lot of time to get to consensus is agriculture. Because most of the time all these partners feel that, okay, we are I mean, the tariffs is high, you have to reduce that and all those things. And we say, no, it's politically sensitive. But within that, what are the areas that we are competent so
Right.
that we can compete in a global
Yes.
market? Where do we have that kind of comparative advantage? And also, where do we need actually imports like edible oils, which we have to allow imports? Right?
Yeah.
So that kind of conversation get lost because we say that it's politically sensitive.
And I think that also kind of impacts the whole FPI sector, which is the food processing
Yeah,
industry in India, which has been lagging heavily compared to the not just like every other country actually. Probably this could, if there is this competition allowed, that's when farmers will think about the next step of this product itself.
So that's like right now the goal is MSP.
Yes.
How do you think beyond that and see that like
Right.
how can I go
Yes.
beyond that?
Yes, the end product shouldn't be just the crop harvest
yeah.
itself, right? One good example also I remember is when this FTA between India and the ASEAN coming up, the protest that happened across the rubber. It was huge. And they're like, natural rubbers of India are going to lose their markets or their competitiveness. Nothing like that happened. It actually maintained the kind of market level for the Indian rubber as well as allowed, of course, the imports of other rubber. So it is actually high time that we look at the success stories that actually happen and kind of implement that.
Seriously, like if you look at Malaysia or Philippines, for example, they are the highest producers of palm oil,
Yes.
right? So they export more than 60-70% of their produce.
Exactly.
And that's one of the areas where their economy is growing. I think I heard that they're also thinking of like introducing some kind of protectionist measures, but I hope they don't, because like that's where the economy is growing, then you have to like promote it.
Right. Correct.
And yeah, I think that's the end goal.
Too many insights to take away, but so what would be the few recommendations that you can just put it in one line?
Yeah. I think like I go back and I say that like, okay, I understand it's a politically sensitive topic, but again we have to see what is the overturn window that we have right here, right? So I think there is definitely a scope for India to open up in carefully chosen areas and without undermining, of course, the domestic farmers' interest and all those things. So, for example, one instance, I think I took this example quite a lot in this discussion. India is already one of the largest importers of edible oil.
Right.
So that means like we have that constant demand for edible oil. So if you open up that, the demand is sustained there. There is no like you have a constant demand that's growing. So definitely even if you open up, I don't think that's going to harm any. It's not going to harm the domestic producers at all. So you can definitely open up that sector. And similarly, if you look at rice, particularly basmati, India enjoys a clear comparative advantage in that sector. Like, we are price competent. There is a definite global demand for Indian rice and the brand that comes with it. So definitely you can actually open up that sector, reduce the import barriers, and whenever you're signing an FTA, you negotiate with your partners that, okay, this is what we're looking for. You have to reduce that any barriers that you have on rice too. So you have that mutual thing going on there, right? So that's one area. So basically, whenever you are trying to open up a sector, I think two factors that we can definitely look like whether India has a relative price competitiveness in the global market. If it's high, that's one a variable that we can definitely consider, and also look at what are the export opportunity in partner markets. If that's also high, for example, if there's a higher demand for our products in certain kind of markets, we should definitely capitalize that instead of putting more barriers and all those things.
One I can think of is the spices
Spices and shrimps is one thing.
Yes,
these are the areas that we have definitely high potential, and these are areas like safe to liberalize goods, right?
Yes.
And also we have to see. So one is that we have a competitiveness in this sector. So shrimp, spice, rice, all these things actually we do have a lot of competitive advantage. Just go ahead and see what kind of market access we get from our partner countries. Second is the areas that we do need imports like edible oil, and for example coconut oil, its price is at 500 liters, like triple or like more than the rate of the prices that we had last year. So definitely there is a demand, and you need that supply to come much more cheaply than it is right now. And products like almonds, pistachios, there's a growing demand for these kind of products, and definitely I think reducing duties means that we might be able to have much more free negotiations with our partner countries like US, although we have all these issues going on right now. I think once you're back into the negotiating table, this could be something that we can offer them. And like we can also like ask for much more market access for rice and other products as well. So there's a lot of opportunity in these.
I think, very deep and insightful discussion, Anisree. Thanks for that. And I think it is high time that we don't look at sustainable agriculture just from an environmental angle, but really from an economic angle. Farmers are looking for a livelihood, a stable income, all of that. If you are able to provide that in a sustainable manner, that would be much better for the country, just for and for the community. Of course, the consumers, producers, everybody in that sector. And thank you so much, and stay tuned for more.
Thank you.
Thank you.